Hi, thank you. Good to see familiar faces and good to be able to share tonight. Basically, what I want to share tonight is in two parts. One is about the development of the community garden at St Mark's Haydock. The other part is that I've been requested to talk a bit about fundraising. It's obvious that those that have already spoken are well into that sort of thing, but I thought I would be able to give you some ideas from a long time of being involved in that process. So the vision for the garden came from the church gardener, a lady called Anne, who shared this with a few people in the church just before I joined the church, but was quite hesitant about starting the garden. It's only when I came to the church that she got the confidence to move ahead, and that's how we've gone on since. The vision for the garden was a beautiful place for the community to enjoy, a place where people could learn about growing and enjoying plants and gardening, a haven for wildlife, and a quiet space. The quiet space developed in other ways than what we'd originally thought, and I'll share that later. It's an aerial view of the garden site. The church has a campus of about 4 acres, spread 2 sides of a side road, a large graveyard, a playing field, the site that was not ours at the time, which became the community garden site. I'll show you more of that in a minute, and then the area around the church. The promise that Anne had for the garden was that the land that she'd identified that wasn't ours at the side of the car park and the graveyard was wasteland that would become like the Garden of Eden, and the verse from Ezekiel there. And that's what it looked like, looking one way. There was probably equally as much looking the other way. A pretty devastating place where the local druggies met and where people put their rubbish. When we talked about starting the garden, we decided to have a vision day within one of our regular community days. So we had about 1,000 people would come onto the site, and we would invite them to participate in designing the garden, saying what they might want in a community garden. And we involved the children and we involved the adults as well. And people were invited to colour and put points that they thought should be incorporated into the tree. As you see, we had a lot of people from the church and also people from the community come in and help us clear it. We took away, I think, something like 6 skips, large skips of rubbish, barbed wire, brambles, lots of different things. The site had been an allotment during the war, but had become overgrown. Some of our original team jumping on the skip to keep it down. We had a coffee morning in which we shared the vision more widely with members of the church and the community in what is our foyer cafe at the front of the church. We didn't actually start looking for funds initially, but then Hope 08 came into play, and I got a phone call out of the blue saying, they'd heard about our proposals and would we like some money to start off. So within a few weeks, we'd set out onto the school playground. We actually hadn't owned the school until very recently at that point. And the school is situated next to the church and we started putting the walls up. Unfortunately, we had vandalism the weekend after this and had to rebuild them again. But after that, things turned out fine. These were raised beds for people with varying disabilities. And then the local ward committee came to our aid and offered to bulldoze the edge of the car park and to put the soil back so that we had a bank. And also they put a fence up for us free of charge. which meant that we could secure the place because there was a lot of vandalism happening. The local authority gave us the land for £1. It cost us a lot more to transfer it legally, but that was the site before we put the outer fence in. We started getting a lot of congregational participation and enthusiasm, one of which was bulb planting. I remember at harvest when bulb planting happened after the service, you couldn't move for adults and children with trowels planting bulbs in that bank you've just seen. In National Tree Week, we planted trees. The young people planted them in the snow. We'd covered over the sites and it snowed, and we were able to plant the trees, which are now more than 30 foot high. So we have always tried to involve right across the church and volunteers. And because of our community work, we run a project called Tango, which has been going now nearly 22 years. And a lot of people come onto the site because it's a site where they can obtain recycled furniture, clothing, and so on. We have a cafe there as well. And so we can involve people who come along to that as well. We created a spiritual walk. This was part of the Quiet Garden thing, and we actually became affiliated to the Quiet Garden Trust, of which I'm now a trustee. If you've not heard of it before, it's a UK-based charity which hosts over 320 gardens worldwide. And the concept of them is a place where people can go and be quiet, meditate, and enjoy the garden space as well. These are some of the providers that provided us. If you're not familiar with the landfill trust funds, if you have, well, I'll talk about it later, but if you're near a suitable site, you can apply for funds from that government orientated fund. You've heard of Mersey Forest already. This is the garden as it looks now. This is the path down to the Labyrinth in the centre of the garden. And we have a series of paths, which means that the garden is fully accessible for people in wheelchairs and for children. And children love these areas where they can use the stepping stones. The foundation, the Westhill Foundation, they provided the funds for the spiritual walk and for the signage. We've signed the whole site so that people can, from the church or wherever they are on the site, can find themselves a way to get to where they want to go. This is within the Labyrinth, and this is 2 sites that the children designed, and they're based on the words of Philippians 4 verse 8, which has got 8 words, and these 2 are pure and lovely, but entirely designed by children. And the mosaic there was actually done by children in their Sunday classes. For the greenhouse, we needed a greenhouse, and we were able to get a grant through the National Gardens Ellsworth Thompson bursary scheme. That's the completed greenhouse. This area here, Tango specialises in recycling anything they get their hands on, gets brought to them. Here we made a raised bed garden on an area of the garden that was unsuitable for cultivation because of it being previously it had been an air raid shelter. And we used these crates that stone is imported in, and use the bags that build us, these ton bags, to make raised bed gardens. And that area is specifically for growing veggies and things of that kind. The bank now has been completely planted up with bulbs and trees, and as you can see, it's quite mature. on the left-hand side, there's one of the main paths which takes you from the church to the graveyard, along which we've made a spiritual walk. This is the main access path, which is in the middle, and that takes you from one end to the other again. There are 6 rooms in the garden, one by the side of the church, one is the raised bed garden, then onto the back gardens, and then into the centre part of the garden where there are 3 other areas, all different. And what we have found throughout the process, that basically God moves ahead and does things even before we actually have planned them, but it's God who makes things grow, not us. I'd like to now say a little bit about funding. The story of the garden and this ideas about funding will be available to you after the session. I've produced a handout with it all on. But I'd just like to say that I'm still involved in fundraising now for several charities, but fundraising is not an easy process, particularly these days. It's got a lot more sophisticated. I was doing a proposal yesterday, and having read all the instructions very carefully and noted all the key points, I found that there was a part in the centre of it which was indicating the need for match funding, i.e. funding that you had already, which had not been mentioned anywhere else on the quite complex pages in the website. So just to say, it's never easy, really, in my experience. The other thing I'd like to say about funding, before you actually go about thinking about funding through approaching other charities and so on, is that what you actually know and who you know are more important than looking outside for funds. So if you know people who have an interest in what you're doing, or can be asked to pass the interest you have on to others, that is often, in my experience, a more profitable way of obtaining funding and resources, and not just funding, but resources, if you can use the contacts you already have. Getting into fundraising raises a whole lot of issues, particularly the one that I've found over the years, is that if you're not very careful, what the fund giving body wants to do may not match completely with what you want to do. And you find yourself in completing application forms and so on, being driven or steered towards getting those things right on the form, which may lead you in a direction you don't actually want to go. That would be my caution about fundraising. Having said that, the garden and other projects I've been involved in, fundraising has been fundamental to the ongoing development. Tango has quite a large team of volunteers, but also employs quite a few part-time staff. And over the years, we've gradually noticed that that becomes an issue, ongoing funding, because so much funding is short-term. So if you're thinking about employing people rather than just using volunteers, one needs to think about the fact that you'll be into a constant chain if you're not careful of looking for ongoing funding to keep the project going. I think that's all I need to say at the moment. I'll keep the rest of the questions, and the rest will be on the handout. Thank you.